A single gunshot echoed through the parched valley, startling the man who sat alone beside his campfire in the shadow of the Painted Rock Mountains of Arizona Territory, 1875. Weston Hayes froze, coffee cup suspended halfway to his lips, as he listened for any further disturbance in the pre-dawn stillness. The shot had come from the direction of Rattlesnake Creek, or what remained of it in this third year of devastating drought. Weston set his cup down and reached for his Winchester rifle, his weathered face tense beneath the brim of his dusty Stetson. At 32, he'd spent enough years in these territories to know that unexpected gunfire at dawn rarely brought good tidings. He whistled softly for his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding named Copper, who trotted obediently to his side. "Easy, boy," Weston murmured, swinging into the saddle. "Let's see what troubles found us now." The rising sun cast long shadows across the landscape as Weston guided Copper down the rocky slope toward the dried creek bed. Years ago, Rattlesnake Creek had been a reliable water source for travelers and cattle alike, but now it was nothing more than a winding scar of cracked earth and scattered stones. As he rounded a bend in the dried waterway, Weston spotted movement, a figure stumbling among the rocks, clearly disoriented. He approached cautiously, one hand on his rifle, until he could make out the silhouette of a woman in a torn dress, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. She hadn't noticed him yet, and as he watched, she suddenly collapsed to her knees, then pitched forward onto the hard ground. "Damn it," Weston muttered, spurring Copper forward. He dismounted swiftly, approaching the fallen woman with wary steps. Raiders, bandits, and all manner of desperate folk roamed these parts. This could be a trap. But as he drew closer, he saw no signs of an ambush. Just a woman, face down in the dust, a small revolver clutched in her right hand. Her dress, once fine but now filthy and torn, was stained dark along one side. Blood. Weston knelt beside her and gently rolled her onto her back. Her face was streaked with dirt and dried blood, but even through the grime, he could see she was young, perhaps mid-20s, with delicate features now strained with pain. Her eyes fluttered open at his touch, revealing irises the color of summer sage. She gasped and attempted to raise her pistol, but her strength failed her and the weapon clattered to the ground. "Easy now," Weston said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you, madam." She stared at him with unfocused eyes. "Water," she rasped, her voice barely audible. "Please?" Weston uncorked his canteen and carefully lifted her head, bringing the vessel to her cracked lips. "Small sips," he cautioned. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She obeyed, taking a few desperate swallows before collapsing back against his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "What's your name?" Weston asked, scanning their surroundings. That gunshot still concerned him. "Dorothea," she murmured. "Dorothea Sterling." "I'm Weston Hayes. What happened to you, Miss Sterling?" Her eyes widened suddenly and she struggled to sit up. "They'll be coming. We need to go." "Who's coming?" Weston asked sharply, but she was already losing consciousness again. Weston hesitated only briefly before making his decision. Whatever trouble this woman was in, he couldn't leave her to die in this desolate place. He gathered her carefully in his arms, mindful of her apparent injury, and placed her on Copper's back before mounting behind her. "Hold on, Miss Sterling," he said, though she couldn't hear him now. "We're going home." The journey back to Weston's small ranch took nearly an hour. By the time the modest cabin came into view, nestled against a rocky hillside with a small corral and barn nearby, Dorothea Sterling's breathing had grown shallow, and fever flushed her cheeks. His ranch hand, an older man named Luis Mendoza, hurried from the barn as they approached. "Que paso?" he called, his weathered face creasing with concern when he spotted the unconscious woman. "Found her down at Rattlesnake Creek," Weston explained, carefully dismounting while supporting Dorothea's limp form. "She's hurt. Might have been shot." Luis immediately took Copper's reins. "I'll take care of the horse. You get the senorita inside." Weston carried Dorothea into the cabin, laying her gently on his bed. In the better light, he could see that what he'd taken for a bloodstain was indeed a bullet wound in her side. It didn't appear to have hit anything vital, but she'd lost blood, and the wound was angry with the beginnings of infection. He gathered clean cloths, his bottle of whiskey, and a basin of water from the kitchen pump. With careful hands, he cleaned away the dirt and blood from around the wound, then steeled himself for what came next. "This is going to hurt, Miss Sterling," he said, though she remained unconscious. "But it needs doing." He poured whiskey over the wound to cleanse it, causing Dorothea to jerk awake with a cry of pain. Her eyes flew open, wild with fear and confusion. "It's all right," Weston said quickly. "You're safe, remember me, Weston Hayes, I found you by the creek." Recognition slowly dawned in her eyes, followed by wariness. "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 5 miles north of where I found you. You've been shot," she grimaced. "I'm aware." The bullet went clean through, which is a blessing, but the wound's starting to fester. "I need to clean it properly and bandage it." Dorothea swallowed hard, then gave a tight nod. "Do what you must." Weston worked as quickly and gently as he could, cleaning the wound thoroughly despite her stifled cries of pain. When he finished, he helped her drink some water and swallow a small dose of laudanum for the pain. "Thank you," she said, her voice already growing drowsy from the medicine. "Not many men would help a stranger." "Rest now," Weston replied. "We can talk when you're stronger." As she drifted into drug-induced slumber, Weston settled into a chair by the window, his rifle across his lap. Whoever had shot this woman might still be looking for her, and he intended to be ready if they came. For 3 days, Dorothea Sterling drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. Weston tended her wound, coaxed broth and water between her lips, and bathed her forehead with cool cloths when the fever burned highest. When she spoke, her words were often incoherent pleas for someone to run, to hide, mentions of papers, and a name that sounded like Barton or Burton. On the morning of the 4th day, Weston awoke in his chair to find her watching him, her green eyes clear for the first time since he'd found her. "You're still here," she said softly. Weston straightened, rubbing the stiffness from his neck. "It's my house," he replied with a small smile. "Where else would I be, I meant." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Most men would have either left me to die or handed me over to the law by now." "Are you wanted by the law, Miss Sterling?" A shadow crossed her face. "No, but the men hunting me would tell you differently." Weston leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I think it's time you told me what kind of trouble you're in. If I'm harboring you, I have a right to know what might come calling at my door." Dorothea struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. Weston quickly moved to help her, propping pillows behind her back. "My father was Theodore Sterling," she began. Weston's eyebrows rose. "The railroad man," she nodded. "He died 3 weeks ago. Officially, it was heart failure." "And unofficially, he was murdered," she said flatly. "By his business partner, William Burton." Weston let out a low whistle. "That's a serious accusation against a powerful man. I have proof." Her hands twisted in the blanket covering her lap. "My father suspected Burton was embezzling from the company and secretly diverting funds to bribe territorial officials for land grants. He kept records, evidence of the fraud, when he confronted Burton privately." Her voice faltered. "The next day he was dead, and you have these records." She nodded. "I took them from my father's safe. I was planning to take them to the federal marshal in Tucson. Burton's men caught up with me near Rattlesnake Creek. They killed my horse, and I barely escaped on foot. I managed to wound one of them before running, but they shot me as I fled." "These papers, where are they now?" "Hidden in the lining of my boot." Weston glanced at her boots, which he'd removed and placed near the door. "Burton's a dangerous enemy to make. He owns half the judges in the territory." "I know." Her eyes held a determination that impressed him. "But I can't let him get away with murdering my father." Weston ran a hand through his hair, considering. "You're in no condition to travel yet. You can stay here until you're stronger. Then we'll figure out how to get you and those papers to someone who can't be bought." Relief washed over her face. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." The question caught him off guard. Why was he helping her? It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she certainly was, even pale and weakened from her injury. There was something in her eyes, a courage and determination that resonated with him. "Let's just say I've seen enough injustice in this world," he finally answered. "I don't need to add to it by turning away someone who needs help." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes." "Weston," he corrected. If you're going to be staying under my roof, you might as well use my given name. A small smile touched her lips. Then you must call me Dorothea. Over the next week, Dorothea's strength gradually returned. The fever broke completely, and the wound began to heal cleanly. Weston found himself increasingly drawn to her company. She was well-educated and quick-witted, with a dry sense of humor that emerged as she recovered. She told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a wealthy businessman who had moved west to expand his empire. She spoke of her mother, who had died when Dorothea was 16, and the subsequent years spent acting as her father's hostess and confidante. He wanted me to marry into another railroad family, she confided one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. A merger of bloodlines to match the merger of companies. And you didn't want that, she shook her head. I wanted to marry for love as my parents did. Father understood eventually. He gave me time to find my own way, her voice caught. Time that was stolen from him. Without thinking, Weston reached over and covered her hand with his own. We'll make it right. Her fingers turned to grasp his, warm and surprisingly strong. Thank you. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither was ready to name. Finally, Weston cleared his throat and withdrew his hand. It's getting cool, we should head inside. That night, as Weston lay on his makeshift bed of blankets near the fireplace, having given his bed to Dorothea, he found himself unable to sleep. The touch of her hand lingered on his skin, and the memory of her smile in the fading light kept returning to his mind. He was falling for her. It was foolish and dangerous, and completely unstoppable. The following morning, Lewis rode in from town with supplies and news that made Weston's blood run cold. There are men asking questions, the old ranch hand reported in a low voice as they stood by the corral. 4 of them working for a man named Burton. They're offering a reward for information about a woman matching Senorita Sterling's description. They say she's wanted for theft. Weston's jaw tightened. They're in Juniper Flats, Lewis nodded, staying at the Stagecoach Inn. They've been there 2 days now. Juniper Flats was the nearest town, barely 15 miles away, too close for comfort. They'll start checking outlying ranches soon, Weston muttered. We need to move her somewhere safer. My cousin has a place near the border, Lewis offered. Very remote. No one would think to look there. Weston considered this. That might work, but first, I need to get into town and find out exactly what we're dealing with. He found Dorothea in the garden behind the cabin, hanging freshly washed linens on a line. The domestic scene struck him powerfully, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, wearing one of his old shirts tucked into her skirt, her movements careful but growing stronger each day. She looked as if she belonged there. She turned at his approach, a smile warming her face before she caught his serious expression. What's wrong? Burton's men are in Juniper Flats, he said without preamble. They're looking for you. The color drained from her face, but she remained composed. How many? 4, according to Lewis. She nodded thoughtfully. Burton would have sent his best, probably led by a man named Reeves Tall with a scar across his chin. I'm riding into town to gather information. I need to know what they know, how wide they've spread their net. I should come with you, she said immediately. Absolutely not. It's too dangerous, her eyes flashed. This is my fight, Weston. I won't have you risking yourself while I hide. You're still healing, he reminded her, and if they're watching the roads, they'll spot you immediately. She opened her mouth to argue further, then winced as she moved too quickly and pulled at her wound. Weston raised an eyebrow, making his point without words. Fine, she conceded reluctantly. But be careful. These men won't hesitate to kill you if they suspect you're helping me. The concern in her voice warmed him even as the danger of their situation weighed on his shoulders. I've been taking care of myself in these territories for a long time, he assured her. I'll be back before nightfall. Juniper Flats was a dusty collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with a few side streets branching off where the more respectable citizens lived. The town had grown around a junction of cattle trails and now served as a supply point for the surrounding ranches and a resting place for travelers heading south toward Tucson or north to Prescott. Weston tied Copper outside the general store and adjusted his gun belt before stepping onto the boardwalk. He kept his movements casual as he scanned the street, noting a group of unfamiliar horses outside the stagecoach in across the way. Inside the store, he greeted Tom Rollins, the proprietor, with a nod. "Afternoon, Tom. Need some coffee, ammunition, and whatever mail might have come for me." "Weston Hayes," Tom replied, reaching beneath the counter for the requested items. "Haven't seen you in a few weeks." "Keeping busy out at that rock pile you call a ranch." "Always something that needs doing," Weston answered easily, though his attention was focused on the two men who had just entered the store behind him. One was indeed tall, with a prominent scar across his chin Reeves, if Dorothea's description was accurate. The other was shorter, with the hard eyes of a professional gun hand. Both wore city clothes that looked out of place in the frontier town. Weston pretended to examine a display of tobacco while listening to their conversation with Tom. "Just asking if you've seen this woman," Reeves was saying, sliding a paper across the counter. "She stole some valuable documents from my employer. There's a $100 reward for information leading to her recovery." Tom studied the paper. "Can't say as I have. Pretty thing, though. What'd she do exactly?" "Took advantage of her father's death to steal company records," Reeves replied smoothly. "Mr. Burton was quite fond of the girl, hates to press charges, but business is business." $100 is a lot of money," Tom mused. "I'll keep an eye out." "We're checking all the outlying properties," the shorter man added. "She might have sought shelter with someone who doesn't come to town regular." Weston casually approached the counter. "Trouble with a thief?" he asked, pitching his voice to sound merely curious. Reeves turned to him, eyes narrowing slightly. "You a local, Mr. Weston Hayes?" "Got a small spread about 15 miles north." "Then you should know about this too," Reeves said, pushing the paper toward him. "Seen this woman around?" Weston studied the crude drawing of Dorothea. It captured her basic features but missed the intelligence in her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. "Can't say that I have," he replied, handing back the paper, "but I don't get many visitors out my way." "Mind if we ride out and take a look?" the shorter man asked. "We're checking everywhere." "Free country," Weston shrugged, maintaining his casual demeanor while his mind raced. "But I'd appreciate some notice before you come barging in. Man likes to know who's coming to his door in these parts." "Of course," Reeves said with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll likely be out tomorrow or the day after. We're working our way around systematically." "I'll be looking forward to it," Weston replied, gathering his purchases. "Good luck with your search, gentlemen." Outside, he loaded his supplies into his saddlebags, his mind working furiously. They had a day, maybe two, before Burton's men came to the ranch. Not enough time to get Dorothea fully recovered and on the road to somewhere safe. As he mounted Copper, a voice called his name. He turned to see Sheriff Bill Coleman approaching, his silver star catching the afternoon sun. "Hayes," the lawman greeted him. "Got a minute?" Weston nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Coleman glanced up and down the street before speaking in a lowered voice. "Those men asking about the Sterling woman, I don't trust them. Something doesn't sit right." Weston's interest sharpened. "Oh, got a telegram from a friend in the marshal's office in Tucson. There's some question about Theodore Sterling's death. Might not have been natural causes after all." "That's so." Weston kept his tone even, though his heart raced. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. These fellows have been asking specifically about ranches where a single man might take in a woman without questions. Your name came up." Weston felt a chill run down his spine. "Appreciate the warning, Bill," the sheriff nodded. "You always were a decent sort, Hayes. Be careful. These city types play by different rules." By the time Weston returned to the ranch, the sun was sinking behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the land. He found Dorothea waiting anxiously on the porch, a rifle across her lap. "You're back," she said, relief evident in her voice. "I was worried." "We need to talk," he replied grimly, dismounting and securing Copper. "Burton's men will be here by tomorrow, maybe the next day at latest." Inside, he explained everything he'd learned while Dorothea listened intently, her face growing paler as he described Reeves and his companion. "The sheriff suspects something's not right about your father's death," Weston concluded. "That could be useful." "But not soon enough," Dorothea said, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "If Reeves finds me here, he'll kill us both and take the evidence. Then we need to get you and those papers somewhere safe until you're strong enough to travel to Tucson." She stopped pacing and faced him directly. "No, I won't run anymore, and I won't put you in further danger." Her voice hardened with resolve. "It's time to take the fight to Burton." "What are you suggesting?" "We use me as bait," she said. "Draw Reeves out, capture him, and force him to confess to my father's murder." "That's insane," Weston protested. "He's a professional killer." "Yes, but he's also the key to bringing down Burton, if we can turn him against his employer, and how exactly do you plan to do that?" "Every man has his price," Dorothea said grimly, "or his breaking point." Weston shook his head. "It's too dangerous. I won't risk your life on such a desperate gamble." Their eyes locked in silent battle of wills until Lewis's voice called from outside, urgent and alarmed. "Riders coming, 4 men moving fast," Weston cursed. "They must have followed me from town." He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. "Get your boots and get ready to run if I tell you to." Dorothea quickly retrieved her boots, carefully extracting the hidden documents from the lining of one before pulling them both on. She checked her small revolver, now loaded with fresh cartridges Weston had provided. "I won't leave you to face them alone," she said quietly. Before Weston could argue, the riders thundered into the yard. He recognized Reeves and his companion from the store, along with 2 other hard-faced men. All were armed. "Hayes," Reeves called out. "We know she's in there. Send out Dorothea Sterling and we'll leave you in peace." Weston turned to Dorothea. "Stay back from the windows," he murmured, then raised his voice to address the men outside. "Don't know what you're talking about, Reeves." "There's no woman here. We followed your tracks from town," Reeves replied. "And we've been watching this place since yesterday. We saw her hanging laundry. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Weston's mind raced. If they'd been watching the ranch, then Lewis's cousin's place might be compromised as well. They were trapped. "What do you want with her?" he called, stalling for time. "That's not your concern. Mr. Burton just wants what belongs to him." "The evidence of his crimes, you mean?" Dorothea suddenly called out, ignoring Weston's gesture to stay silent. "The proof that he murdered my father." There was a momentary silence outside, then Reeves's voice, colder now. "Miss Sterling, you've led us on quite a chase. Why don't you come out now and we can discuss this like civilized people?" "I have copies of everything," she bluffed. "Documents safely delivered to people who will act if anything happens to me. Coming after me now only guarantees Burton's downfall." Weston looked at her in surprise. It was a desperate bluff, but delivered with such conviction that even he half believed it. The men outside conferred in low voices, then Reeves called again. "Throw out your weapons and come out, both of you. Mr. Burton is willing to negotiate." "He's lying," Weston whispered. "The moment we're exposed, they'll shoot us both." Dorothea nodded. "I know, but we're outnumbered and surrounded." A shot suddenly cracked through the air, splintering the window frame inches from Weston's head. He jerked back, pulling Dorothea down with him. "That was a warning," Reeves shouted. "The next one goes through your head, Hayes. You have 1 minute to surrender." "The back door," Weston whispered urgently. "If we can reach the ravine behind the house, we might be able to circle around to the barn where Lewis is. He has a wagon ready." Dorothea nodded, her face set with determination. "Lead the way." They crawled through the cabin, keeping low beneath the windows as more shots peppered the front of the house. Reaching the back door, Weston cautiously peered out. The ground sloped away toward a brush-filled ravine about 50 yards from the house. "Ready?" he asked, gripping his rifle. Dorothea placed her hand over his, her touch steadying despite the danger. "Together." On his count of 3, they burst through the door and sprinted for the ravine. Shouts immediately erupted from the front of the house, followed by the thunder of boots as Burton's men ran to intercept them. Gunfire erupted behind them. Weston felt a bullet whiz past his ear as they reached the edge of the ravine and half slid, half tumbled down the embankment. Dorothea stumbled, crying out as the impact jarred her healing wound, but kept moving. They crashed through brush and scrambled across the dry stream bed at the bottom of the ravine, then began working their way back toward the barn. Behind them, Burton's men were making their way down the slope, shouting to each other as they spread out to search. Almost there, Weston encouraged as they climbed the opposite bank, the barn now visible through the trees. Just a little further. A shot rang out and Dorothea gasped, stumbling forward. Weston's heart stopped, but she regained her balance immediately. "I'm all right," she panted. "Just startled me." They reached the edge of the trees with the barn tantalizingly close. Weston could see Lewis waiting with a wagon, the horses already hitched and ready. "On my signal, run for the wagon," Weston said. "I'll cover you." "We go together," Dorothea insisted. "I won't leave you behind." Before he could argue, a voice called from directly behind them. "That's far enough." They turned to find Reeves standing 10 yards away, his revolver aimed steadily at Dorothea's heart. His scarred face twisted in a cold smile. "Impressive effort," he said. "But it ends here. Drop the rifle, Hayes." Weston hesitated, calculating his chances of shooting Reeves before the man could fire. "They weren't good. Don't try it," Reeves warned, as if reading his thoughts. "Even if you get me, my men will cut you down before you take 2 steps." As if to emphasize his point, the other 3 gunmen emerged from the trees, all with weapons trained on them. Slowly, Weston lowered his rifle to the ground. "The papers, Miss Sterling," Reeves demanded. "Hand them over." "They're hidden," she replied defiantly. "You'll never find them." "Search her," Reeves ordered one of his men, who approached with a leering grin. "Touch her and you're dead," Weston growled. The man laughed. "Big talk from someone about to die." As the gunman reached for Dorothea, a shot cracked through the air. The man jerked and fell, blood blossoming on his chest. In the next instant, chaos erupted as more shots came from the direction of the barn. Lewis had opened fire, providing the distraction they needed. Weston dove for his rifle, rolling as he came up and firing at Reeves. The bullet caught the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around. "Run," Weston shouted to Dorothea, who was already moving toward the barn. More shots exchanged as Burton's remaining men sought cover. Weston fired again, striking one in the leg before turning to sprint after Dorothea. They reached the wagon as Lewis provided covering fire. Weston helped Dorothea climb aboard, then jumped up beside her as Lewis slapped the reins and the horses lunged forward. Bullets whined around them as they thundered away from the barn, but soon they were out of range, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them. "Are you hit?" Weston asked urgently, checking Dorothea for new injuries. "No," she gasped, clutching her side where her old wound ached from the exertion. "You?" He shook his head, relief washing through him. "Where are we headed, Lewis?" "There is a mission about 20 miles south," the old ranch hand replied. "Father Gabriel will give us sanctuary." Dorothea leaned against Weston, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "I never meant to bring this trouble to your door," she whispered. Weston put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "You didn't ask to be shot and left for dead either," he reminded her. "We're in this together now." She looked up at him, vulnerability and strength mingling in her gaze. "Why? You could have handed me over, saved yourself all this." The wagon jostled over the rough terrain as Weston considered his answer. In the few weeks since he'd found her by the dried creek bed, Dorothea Sterling had appended his solitary existence and awakened feelings he'd thought long buried. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Justice, truth." He paused, gathering courage. Her eyes widened, and for a moment he feared he'd overstepped. Then she reached up, her hand gently touching his face. "I've never met anyone like you, Weston Hayes." Before he could respond, she leaned up and pressed her lips to his in a brief, tender kiss that nevertheless sent his heart racing. "We will find a way through this," she promised. "Together." The mission of San Xavier del Bac stood stark white against the darkening sky as they approached, its twin towers reaching toward heaven like prayers made solid. Father Gabriel, a gentle-eyed Franciscan with iron in his spine, welcomed them without question and provided a small, clean room where Dorothea could rest. "Burton's men will not violate the sanctuary of God's house," the priest assured them, though Weston noted he kept a shotgun within easy reach nonetheless. While Dorothea slept, Weston and Lewis discussed their options with Father Gabriel, who had connections throughout the territory from years of ministering to both settlers and native peoples. "I can send word to Judge Wilson in Tucson," the priest offered. He is an honest man beyond Burton's influence. Can he be trusted with this? Weston asked. Burton has powerful friends. The judge has more powerful enemies of Burton, Father Gabriel replied with a slight smile, men who would be very interested in evidence of corruption and murder. By morning, a plan had taken shape. Dorothea's documents would be copied, with one set sent ahead to Judge Wilson while they traveled to Tucson with the originals by a different route. Father Gabriel would spread rumors that they had fled west toward California, hopefully drawing Burton's men in the wrong direction. When Weston explained the plan to Dorothea, she listened carefully, then shook her head. It won't work, she said. Burton is too careful. He'll have men watching all approaches to Tucson. What do you suggest? We need to go where he least expects, directly to his doorstep in Phoenix. Weston stared at her. That's madness. It's the last place he'll look for us, she argued. And it gives us access to the territorial governor, who has the authority to order an immediate investigation into my father's death and Burton's business practices. The governor might be in Burton's pocket too, Weston pointed out. I don't believe he is. My father spoke highly of him as a man of integrity. It's worth the risk. After much debate, they agreed to modify the plan. Father Gabriel would still send copies of the documents to Judge Wilson as insurance, but Weston and Dorothea would travel north to Phoenix, hopefully arriving before Burton realized their destination. They departed the following night, traveling under cover of darkness with fresh horses provided by the mission. Lewis remained behind to continue the deception that they had fled west. The journey to Phoenix would take nearly a week, following seldom-used trails through some of the most rugged terrain in the territory. As they rode side by side beneath a canopy of stars, Weston found himself studying Dorothea's profile, illuminated by moonlight. She had changed since he'd found her half dead by the creek bed. The pampered daughter of wealth had been burned away, revealing a core of steel he admired deeply. She rode as if born to the saddle, never complained despite the discomfort of her healing wound, and faced their desperate situation with clear-eyed courage. You're staring, she said without turning her head, a smile in her voice. Just thinking how remarkable you are, he replied honestly. Now she did turn, surprise evident in her expression. Me, I'm just trying to survive. Most people would have given up by now, decided the fight wasn't worth it. She was quiet for a long moment. After my mother died, my father told me something I never forgot. He said, Dorothea, there will be times in life when the easy path leads to darkness, and the right path leads through fire. Always choose the fire. Wise man, your father. Yes, she said softly. He deserves justice, but it's not just about him anymore. She met Weston's gaze directly. It's about us too, the future we might have if we survive this. The implications of her words sent warmth spreading through Weston's chest. Us. Unless I've misunderstood your intentions, Mr. Hayes, she said, a hint of teasing in her tone. You haven't, he assured her, reaching across to take her hand. Not at all. Their journey took them through landscapes of breathtaking beauty and harsh desolation, towering saguaro forests, rocky canyons carved by ancient floods, high desert plateaus where the air thinned and cooled. They traveled by night when possible and hid during the hottest hours of the day, always watchful for signs of pursuit. On the fourth night, as they made camp in the shelter of a sandstone outcropping, Weston finally asked the question that had been troubling him. What happens after, Dorothea? If we succeed, if Burton is brought to justice. She looked up from the small fire where she was brewing coffee. What do you mean? You're Theodore Sterling's daughter. You'll inherit his business interests, his wealth. You'll have responsibilities, expectations. A place in society that's very different from. He gestured at their humble surroundings. From what I can offer. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You think I'll return to my old life and leave all this behind, leave you behind? He shrugged, trying to appear unconcerned though his heart hung on her answer. It would be the sensible thing to do. Dorothea set aside the coffee pot and moved to sit beside him, taking his calloused hands in hers. Weston Hayes, when you found me dying in that creek bed, you didn't just save my life. You showed me a different way to live it. Her eyes held his, unwavering. I don't want to go back to hosting dinner parties and making polite conversation with men who see me as nothing more than a business asset. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. A life with purpose. Work that matters. Land that challenges me and rewards me in equal measure. She squeezed his hands. Someone to share it all with, who sees me for who I truly am. Sounds like you might be describing a certain small ranch north of Juniper Flats, Weston said, hope rising in his chest. Perhaps I am. A smile touched her lips. Though it will need some improvements, a proper garden, maybe a few more rooms eventually. For what? Her smile deepened. A family, Weston, children. The vision she painted their future together filled him with a joy he hadn't thought possible. He drew her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he felt. I love you, Dorothea Sterling, he murmured against her lips. Have since the moment you opened those fierce green eyes and tried to shoot me, she laughed softly. I love you too. Though I'm glad my aim was compromised that day. Their arrival in Phoenix coincided with a sudden, violent summer storm that turned the streets to mud and provided perfect cover for two travel-worn riders seeking the governor's mansion. Lightning split the sky as they approached the impressive adobe structure, rain sluicing from their slickers. The governor's aide initially refused them entry, until Dorothea revealed her identity and the nature of their business. They were quickly ushered into a study where Governor Anson Safford, a stocky man with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to their story with growing concern. These are serious allegations, Miss Sterling, he said when they had finished. Burton is one of the most influential men in the territory. Every word is true, Dorothea replied, placing the documents on his desk. And these prove it. The governor examined the papers carefully, his expression darkening as he read. This evidence of bribery alone would warrant an investigation, but murder. He looked up at them. You realize Burton will fight this with everything he has. We're counting on it, Weston said grimly. The harder he fights, the more guilty he'll appear. Governor Safford nodded slowly. I'll send for the federal marshal immediately. In the meantime, you'll stay here as my guests. Burton has too many eyes in the hotels. For 3 days, they remained at the governor's mansion while the wheels of justice began to turn. Marshal James Redford arrived from Tucson, bringing with him the copies of the documents that Father Gabriel had sent to Judge Wilson. Warrants were drawn up, and a team of deputies assembled. On the morning of the 4th day, as they prepared to move against Burton, a commotion at the front of the mansion brought them all running. Weston reached for his gun as the doors burst open, only to freeze in shock at the sight that greeted them. Luis Mendoza stood there, supported by 2 of the governor's guards, his clothing torn and bloodied. Luis, Weston exclaimed, rushing forward to help his friend. What happened? Burton's men, the old ranch hand, gasped. They found me at the mission, tortured me for information. His eyes found Dorothea. I told them nothing, senorita, but they followed me anyway. They are coming here. As if to confirm his words, gunfire suddenly erupted outside the mansion. Marshal Redford sprinted to the window. At least a dozen men, he reported grimly. Well armed and surrounding the building. A voice bellowed from outside. Governor Safford, send out the Sterling woman and Hayes, and this ends peacefully. Weston recognized Reeves's voice, now carrying a desperate edge. Burton must be truly frightened to attempt something so brazen, the governor remarked, remarkably calm despite the situation. Attacking a governor's mansion in broad daylight speaks of a man who knows he's cornered. What do we do? Dorothea asked, her hand finding Weston's. Marshal Redford checked his weapons. We hold them off. I've got men positioned throughout the city who will respond to gunfire at the governor's residence. And in the meantime, Weston asked. In the meantime, the marshal replied with a grim smile, we remind Mr. Burton and his hired guns that they're not the only ones who know how to shoot. What followed was a fierce gun battle that would later become legend in territorial history, the day William Burton's criminal empire began to crumble in a hail of bullets at the governor's doorstep. Weston and the marshal's deputies took positions at windows throughout the mansion, returning fire as Burton's men attempted to storm the building. Dorothea refused to hide, instead helping to reload weapons and tend to a deputy who took a bullet in the arm. The tide turned with the arrival of the marshal's reinforcements, who caught Burton's men in a crossfire. Outmanned and outgunned, the attackers began to scatter. Reeves, ever the professional, recognized the futility of their position and called for retreat. As the gunfire subsided, Marshal Redford organized a pursuit, determined not to let any of the attackers escape. Governor Safford immediately issued orders for Burton's arrest, sending telegrams to every law enforcement officer in the territory with instructions to apprehend the businessman on sight. "It's over," Dorothea said quietly as they watched from the governor's study window. "Burton will be arrested within days. My father will have justice." Weston put his arm around her shoulders, and then she turned to him, her face alight with possibilities. "And then we go home." William Burton was arrested 3 days later at a railway station near the California border, attempting to flee the territory. The evidence against him was overwhelming, especially after Reeves, captured during the retreat from the governor's mansion, agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. Theodore Sterling's death was officially ruled a murder, and investigations into Burton's business dealings uncovered corruption that reached into every corner of territorial politics. The scandal would reshape the power structure of Arizona Territory for years to come. For Weston and Dorothea, however, the future lay not in Phoenix's corridors of power, but in the rugged beauty of the land north of Juniper Flats. They were married by Father Gabriel at the mission of San Xavier del Bac, with Luis Mendoza and Governor Safford as witnesses. Dorothea wore a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Weston could scarcely believe his good fortune as they spoke their vows beneath the mission's soaring ceiling. "I found you half dead in a dried creek bed," he whispered to her during the celebration that followed. "And in saving you, I saved myself." "We saved each other," she corrected, her eyes shining with happiness. "And now we build something new together." With her inheritance and his knowledge of the land, they transformed the small ranch into a thriving operation. The cabin expanded into a proper house with a wraparound porch where they would sit in the evenings and watch the sunset paint the distant mountains. Luis Mendoza remained with them, eventually bringing his extended family to work on the ranch that became known throughout the territory for its progressive methods and fair treatment of workers. A year after their wedding, Dorothea gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Weston's mother. A son, Theodore, followed 2 years later. The children grew strong and free in the Arizona wilds, learning both their father's practical skills and their mother's educated refinement. Dorothea never completely abandoned her father's business interests, instead redirecting them toward investments in the territory's future schools, hospitals, and eventually, a small railway line that brought increased prosperity to communities previously isolated from commerce. On the 10th anniversary of the day Weston found Dorothea by Rattlesnake Creek, they rode out together at dawn to visit the spot. The drought had long since broken, and the creek now flowed with clear, cool water where once there had been only dust and stones. "It looks so different," Dorothea remarked as they dismounted. "Hard to believe this is where our story began." Weston took her hand, marveling still at how perfectly it fit in his. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd been just a few minutes later that day, or if I'd decided to camp somewhere else." She smiled up at him, the years having added character to her beauty without diminishing it. "I don't believe in coincidence, Weston. I believe we were meant to find each other. Even with all the danger that followed, especially with that," she said firmly, "it forged us, tested us, proved what we were made of." She looked out over the landscape they had come to love. "Every drop of water in this creek bed fought its way here, just as we fought for what we have now." Weston pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "It was worth every moment." "Yes," she agreed, turning in his arms to face him. "Every moment, and all the moments still to come." As the rising sun gilded the landscape around them, Weston kissed his wife beside the creek where fate had first brought them together. From that dried creek bed had flowed a lifetime of love, hardship, joy, and purpose a river of experiences that had shaped them both into something stronger and more beautiful than either could have become alone. And as they rode back toward home, where their children and their future awaited, both knew with absolute certainty that the greatest act of mercy was not when Weston had offered water to a dying woman, but when they had offered their hearts to each other, creating a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives.